Hey everyone, welcome back to another GamePad Online interview. My name is Nigel. I'm the mayamada co-founder and organizer of the GamePad events. You are now watching a series. I feel like I've done enough of these now. I'm going to call them a series of interviews with video games professionals. The idea being to talk to people in the games industry in different roles from different backgrounds about their journeys and the work they do now. So I'm here. This is actually the first. I'm interviewing two people at once. We'll see how well my multitasking skills hold up. But I'm here with Chella Ramanan and Morwood of the indie studio Threefold Games. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Cool. No problem. As always, people watching, let us know what you think in the live stream chat. You can talk to us afterwards in the Discord, or if you're watching this later on YouTube, in the comments. So we are reachable. We're also on social media. So at mayamada on Twitter and at mayamada TV on Instagram. So feel free to reach out after the interview as well. And we're going to jump straight into this. So we've got two people working together, and one is a self-taught designer, programmer, and artist. That's clear. The other is a narrative designer, Chella?
Designer and writer.
Okay, cool. And also the co-founder one of the co-founders of Pock and Play. And we have had another co-founder, Adam, on before. So advise people to check out my conversation with Adam Campbell of Pock and Play. But we're here for you. Let's forget Adam for now. We're here for you. So what we're going to do...
Adam's had his time.
Yeah, he's had his moment. Sorry, Adam. So what we'll do, because there's two of you and your journeys kind of mix and intersect, I'm going to do that thing, like in films where you see like the characters individually, you see their background, and then they kind of meet. So I'm going to start individually, and then we're going to join up this story. So Claire, do you want to tell us a bit about what you were doing before you met Chella, like what you were doing around the industry up until the point where you did meet?
Sure. Well, around the time we met, I was not really in video games. I was kind of doing it more as a hobby. So I was working in tech. I just started working in tech. Before that, I was working in like various like shops and stuff after I finished my degree. But yeah, video games for me at that point were something I kind of did in game jams and just little side projects, weekends and evenings whenever I had time really. I was just kind of like fitting it in where possible because it was something I was very passionate about and really enjoyed doing. And yeah, around I guess a few years before that, I just started learning programming. So I was teaching myself, and I had a few friends as well who programmed, and so they would help me a bit if I was getting stuck, which was very kind of them.
Can I just say, I used to be a programmer. I have no friends that were doing programming. Everyone
no.
But that's really...
it's really like beneficial sometimes, I think, to have someone sort of like explain it to you and like be able to explain it in different ways as well, and for you to actually like ask questions in real time as opposed to like YouTube. I mean, there's a lot of really good YouTube tutorials out there and websites, but yeah, I definitely owe a lot to the people I knew at the time who were would be able to give their time to me.
Cool.
Yeah, so and I was saying, sorry.
I was just going to say, so then you had this this kind of impetus to get into games now, to take it from a sort of side thing to a maybe main thing.
Yeah, I was sort of doing really very small amounts of freelance work at that point. It was just, when something came up and someone was like, oh, I'll give you like 20 quid to make this thing, that sort of thing. And I sort of gradually built that up over time to the point where I was able to like make that my at least sort of like part-time source of income. But yeah, it was definitely a very gradual thing for me.
Okay. Cool. All right. So we've got a bit of the backstory for Claire. Let's jump over to Chella. And before you met Claire, what was your sort of relationship to video games? I know you used to be a journalist, so how did that transition happen from that into video games?
Yeah, so I was just a writer by trade, and I was always writing fiction, much like Claire was doing. Her hobby was video games. I suppose my day job involved video games, but, I wanted to write creatively, so I was always trying to write a book, or I ran a writing group in Taunton in Somerset, and I think it was that same year, or maybe the year before. I think it was the same year I'd been on a writing retreat with the Arbonne Foundation, which is a literary foundation that does sort of week-long retreats in houses around the country, which were donated by famous writers. So I was in Ted Hughes' house up in Hebden Bridge doing a retreat called Writing for Games. So one of the tutors was John Ingold of Inkle Games, and David Varela was another tutor, and then there was a guest spot with Rhianna Pratchett. So I saw this sort of advert for, I think, GameIndustry.biz did an article about it or something, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, because that's like writing and games.
That's the kind of equation I like.
Yeah, I had this light bulb moment. I was like, that's like a job I could do. So then I started focusing my fiction writing on maybe writing games. I was like, maybe I can do this. And I wrote a radio play. I went to a writing for radio workshop, because one of the things I noticed from all the tutors was that they had done several kinds of writing. Rhianna had been a journalist before as well. David Varela had also been a copywriter in a previous life. And he'd written a radio play. Rhianna said she studied theatre writing on her way into video games. And so that got me thinking that, I needed to sort of flex different writing muscles. So I did a writing for radio workshop, which was just a day-long one. And then off the back of that, I wrote a radio play and sort of self-produced it with some friends. It was like a two-head script, so I played one of the roles just for ease, and had a friend who'd done drama and theatre, and he did the other one. And then Dave Tucker, who ended up doing the music on Before I Forget, was the audio sort of engineer, stroke director on it. So we did that, and it aired on local radio, and we had it at a local literary festival and stuff like that. So that was my kind of, I was kind of playing around with ink. I think it was Inky at the time, because ink wasn't quite out, so that was their early iteration. So I started trying to write my own interactive fiction. And then that's, takes us to October 2016.
Cool. Okay, so we got the backstory. Now the characters are all in the same room. They're now met, so now we pick it up from there. This could be a play as well, actually. I might think about that afterwards. All right, so you both met at a games jam. Do you want to tell us what the games jam was? What were your intentions there? And then how did you kind of start to collaborate following that?
So it was a game jam in Bristol called the XX Plus Game Jam, which was for women and non-binary people. And so we, neither of us had met each other before, but we both kind of knew like one like mutual person there who was like the organizer, Constance Soria. And so we, it was, I think it was a 24-hour game. It was quite short, and it was like Friday evening through to Saturday evening, with sleep in the middle. And we were in a team together, and the theme at the game jam was borders. And then, so I don't know, Chella, you want to talk about the theme?
Yeah, so I mean, my personal intention going there, I'd never been to a game jam before. I was slightly terrified, and one of the reasons I went, one was because it was for women and non-binary people, so it made it much less threatening space and to especially not being a technical person, so I wasn't a programmer or anything, so entering a space as a woman, a Black woman, and a writer without technical, like going into a game jam under those was kind of intimidating, not threatening, intimidating. And I actually met Constance at the Writing for Games retreat up in Yorkshire. So we were both from the Southwest, but traveled all this way to meet at this retreat. And it kind of, that retreat changed my life in so many different ways. It's bizarre. And so I messaged her and I was like, oh, I don't think I'm going to go because I'm just a writer. She's like, oh,
just a writer.
Ridiculous. And she's like, just come and it'll be fine. Yeah, so I did. So I went, being quite nervous about it. And then, she sort of threw us into a team together because people were getting their teams. And she said, oh, there's this person here and this person here. And so she threw us together. So she was very instrumental in our lives. And,
very hands-on.
yes, she is. She's great. And the theme was borders. And, at the time, there was a Syrian refugee crisis. Trump was building a wall.
Still
there were all
sorts.
So there were all sorts of geopolitical borders sort of that were top of people's minds, and Brexit and all these sorts of things were swirling around. So we kind of played with those ideas, and then I had in my ideas book, I kind of flicked through it before I went to the game jam, so that I'd have some seeds in my head, so that because I knew we'd be under pressure, I didn't want to just have idea amnesia. And when people say ideas in 10 minutes, go.
And you're like, what's an idea? I don't know.
So I had a little flick through my notebooks, and there was this one that was woman with dementia, and that was it. And so I said, I have this idea for a woman with dementia, and maybe we could look at mental borders instead of physical borders, and then that just kind of sparked ideas for us. It was that was the spark, really.
Wow. Okay. Your game, before I forget, we can sort of talk about that and this idea of, so you describe it as a narrative exploration around early onset dementia. Which sounds like a scary premise for games, and it's not the kind of scenario I think of when I think about video games. And what I mean by scary is that typically with video games, it's almost like a power fantasy. So you are in control, you are empowered. That your scenario is very much a powerless scenario to play out. So do you want to just give us an overview of the game narratively, but also the mechanics involved? And then I want to talk about why you went for something like that versus here's some guns, here's some ammo, let's go, especially as a first person game. But Claire, do you want to give us that overview?
Sure. So like you said, it's a game about it's a game about a woman with dementia, and so you play Sunita, the protagonist, and it's first person, so you're always seeing the world through her eyes, and it doesn't tell you from the offset that she has dementia, but it's I think a lot of people when they play, well, either they've read about it in advance, or they probably pick up on that at least there's something with her memory sort of fairly early on. There's lots of things where she's forgotten particular details, and she's always, one of the first things you come across in the game is that she's looking for someone called Dylan, which then becomes kind of like the goal throughout the story, of who is Dylan, why isn't he here when you expect him to be here, and it's sort of, I guess, partly a mystery story in that sense as well. But yeah, we, in terms of the mechanics of the game, it was, I guess, quite like an interesting challenge in like as you were saying, it's different from how like a lot of video games are. It's this like powerlessness and this sense of like you're not in control. So there was lots of like really interesting things that we had to experiment with to balance that line between you not having control over a situation, but also not getting so frustrated about it that you just like put the controller down and are like, I don't want to play this anymore. But we had a lot of mechanics that tried to act as a metaphor for the her Sunita's kind of state of mind throughout the game. So the main one that we have visually is this color spreading, where in the game it starts with everything is kind of like this monochrome grey, and then as you interact with certain objects, they you can see what Sunita's thinking, and maybe she'll have a memory about them, or maybe she'll just think something in the moment about that object. But as you interact with it, then color kind of spreads out from there to, like, I guess, represent her the memories that she has at that point in time about it. And we have similar things with audio in the game as well. So largely the game is very quiet, and then partly for that purpose of showing her like state of mind, and also in terms of the narrative to represent the music kind of acts as a representative for Dylan, who was a musician in his life, and we used like audio to sort of symbolize that as well.
And I mean, like, Chella, you mentioned this was one of the ideas in like you had and you sort of brought up in this game jam. When I saw it, I wanted to ask, like, is this something that was close to you? Is it like a sort of personal story, or is this, how did you come about for this particular narrative?
Yeah, so it's not, fortunately, we've been asked that question quite often.
I can imagine, yeah.
Fortunately, neither of us have personal experience with someone close to us suffering from dementia. But for me, it was, I have a sort of, as a fiction writer, I have a preoccupation with memory and memory loss. I really like film noir, which quite often will dive into sort of amnesia, the sort of mementos of this world and things like that.
I was going to ask. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, did that come up at any point during the development?
I love that film, and I just like the puzzle of it, and writing a story like that is I like Christopher Nolan films. I know you're not supposed to say that anymore, but I do. I haven't seen Tenet, so I don't know if that will change my mind. But and Inception and all those things, looking at how our mind and our memories work, I find that really fascinating. And so I was writing a novel about someone with amnesia, and so I put that down as an idea that would be interesting. And because it's all about asking, so what happens when someone loses their memory? Who are they? Because there's still a person there, there's still like a body there living a life, but what happens when you lose part of your memories? Who do you become? And that idea that some people with dementia, or even people with amnesia, their personality changes. It sort of sparked off for me that I watched a documentary. It was a Horizon documentary about a guy who woke up on the train in Coney Island or something, and he didn't know who he was or how he got, why he was there. And I thought that was fascinating. And then when I had an operation and I had general anesthetic, and I woke up, I'm a real morning person, so as soon as my eyes open, I'm awake, and that apparently still occurs even after general anesthetic. Because I came around from my operation, the first thing I thought was like, wow, that's amazing, because the last thing I remember is them counting me down, and then it was like that, and I woke up again, and I was like, that's what it must be like being an amnesiac. And I was just like, I thought it was fascinating. So I was like, yeah, I have to remember this kind of feeling. So that was where I came from. That's why that idea was written in my notebook, was, what happens to those people. I knew that people, my friend's mum, for instance, she wanted to have tattoos and she always hated tattoos. So, like, where does that come from, that sort of personality switch? And so, I found it kind of intriguing space to explore.
Okay, that is the good thing about, like you say, that word explore with stories and video games in particular, because you have that ability to explore as the person, the subject of the story. But then, I don't know exactly how to ask this question, but Claire touched on it in terms of, because it's that combination of like wanting to explore this thing, but making a, for lack of a better word, fun experience. So, were there any challenges in doing that? I also imagine that you would have had to did you have to consult with some experts around sort of dementia and to put that in the game? How did that play out in terms of balancing that story exploration, fun game?
Yeah, I guess fun is a tricky word, and
Yeah.
it can mean a lot of different things. And I suppose like engaging is probably like the word that made most sense for us in terms of something that keeps people wanting to play the game. And so it was about like having, I think actually something that was challenging that we didn't have in the game for quite a while was kind of like an overall goal. So this idea of like you're looking for Dylan from the start of the game was something that we had in maybe like a year or two after the start of development, I think.
As in it wasn't there from the beginning?
Dylan was always there, but the idea that you are told as the player, this is your goal, wasn't there from the beginning. So it was more sort of like implied along the way. And I think we found that when people played it, they were interested, but they didn't really know what they were doing. So that was something that we found to, I guess, make the game more engaging and to make people feel like, oh, I really want to like keep going. And because if they have like a particular thing in mind that they are trying to get to, then they can like explore the narrative while, I suppose, like moving towards that clear goal. If that makes sense.
Yeah, because I guess that's the thing with games, and that's, I guess, one of the differences between, say, experience a story through a game and a film. Because when you get the game, like ultimately as a player, like I bought this game, I want to get in, I want to press some buttons and and make stuff happen. So you kind of have to say, hey, some stuff is going to happen. Show them of that, but then say it's going to happen through this kind of lens. So I imagine that's a balance that you would have found like in the sort of play testing, right?
Yeah. You do a game, you don't watch it or read it. You have to, there has to be an action verb in there that, whatever it is. But in terms of, we did consult with experts. So we, there's an organization called Gaming the Mind. So, so through Gaming the Mind, we were put in touch with a doctor who specialized in dementia and Alzheimer's, and they played builds of the game and fed back to us and really helped us kind of pin down the timeline of her disease and her symptoms. So, we'd be like, okay, so if she's at this stage now, how old do you think she'd be, or when do you think this would have started? Like how quickly will it progress? Can she live alone like this? Is this realistic? And would she be able to write? Because she writes notes to herself. So we were like, can she write? Would she have a sort of motor function and things like that? So there are lots of things we could ask, and things they pointed out. And the one we always mention is how language degrades. So it sort of changed the way I wrote things. So she So when you interact with objects in the games, she has a thought about them quite often, and she'll sort of say something, or it will trigger a flashback. But so we had a key on the floor at the very beginning because, what dungeon doesn't have a key? It's like the obvious object for a game to always have.
Yeah, key, chest, door,
yeah exactly. We had a door, let's have a key, and we could never find what we needed to unlock with the key, so we were like, let's lose the key. But anyway, we had a key, and I wrote something like that metal object or something, and the doctor said, oh, they would remember the function rather than form of an object, so it would be that unlocking thing. So, for instance, there's a watch that you find in a drawer, and I think I put round metal thing because it's like a pocket watch, and I changed it to that time counting thing. So it's a really interesting insight into cognitive function of people with dementia that we would probably never, we would have had to read so many academic papers or whatever to find that out.
Yeah, no, but I think that's a good approach in terms of, because like you said, it's not something you'd personally gone through, but I mean, even if it was, you still have to go through that like experts and understand enough to put it into a game.
You might not pick up on that still, even if
And yeah, because you've got this quite heavy topic in the game, I always wonder what the response to it was from people. Did you get the response you were expecting? Were you expecting a particular response?
Were we expecting? I'm not sure. I think to be honest, when we first showed it to people, I think at least I feel like I didn't really know what to expect. I just sort of thought, well, we'll show people and see what they think. Generally. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say the response of the game jam is probably we knew something timed with people because we won the Audience Choice Award there, which really surprised us, and that's the whole reason we carried on. So it was the game that people who participated in the game jam most wanted to see finished. Mm-hmm. So from that point, and people were really kind of buzzing about it.
Yeah.
So there was something right from the beginning, but sorry, Claire, I interrupted.
No, that's all right. No, that's a really good point. I agree. I mean, I think people have always been really interested in it and really, I don't know, it's like generated a lot of conversation whenever we've shown it to people and they've played it. Like quite often people, I mean, obviously if it's like our friends and we're showing them, then we're going to talk about it. But like at events, for example, people would often sort of hang around afterwards and want to chat to us about it, which was, I guess, something that we hadn't anticipated, which was really nice, really positive. I think one thing that we hadn't expected that we got, we don't get so much anymore, but we got a lot early on, was people thinking that, or asking us if it was going to be an educational game, like, specifically for the purpose of teaching about the symptoms of dementia. Which I guess because it's, like you say, a heavy topic, it's like a serious thing. I think people often have associations that a serious game must be educational, or at least should be used for that purpose, rather than just as like a fictional, like as a story or something to engage with in that kind of sense as entertainment. So that was something that we ended up having a lot of conversations with with various people over the first couple of years of development.
Yeah, because, and the reason I bring that up is just I feel like with video games, and I guess you see it more in indie games, just games being stories and now being used more to tell. The word that came to mind is niche. I don't know if that's the right word, but games with particular messages or about sort of particular subjects, and not necessarily being for the masses, and like us as an industry, as players, having to kind of deal with, like I said earlier, games not just being about shooting, just running and shooting, being about something and making you think and think about things that you might not experience personally, you might not have sought out. Like, I'm not necessarily wanting to go and find out about dementia, but being in a position where I can get a different perspective. And I feel that's the power of story and the power of games. But I just wonder what the response is to that from a wider public, and if that I'm not even sure if I have a question, more just a thought, but you know what I'm saying, like about how do we as gamers deal with games that just are about some heavy topics. If you can answer that, that is I feel like there's a question there somewhere, but just that idea, like games being used as a medium for exploration of these subject matter.
Yeah, I think the idea that dementia is niche, I know you said that wasn't the right word, but I think that was a perspective that we came up against, when we were pitching to investors or whatever. So, a little bit more detached from the player experience. It was like, oh, this would be great for older people, because it has someone over 25.
Okay, and that's the response that you got from
investors, because it's about an old lady, and then and we never felt that, and then we took it to the first event we took it to was a Comic-Con at the top of my road, so it was like we were like, this isn't going to be our audience, it's going to be sort of kids and their parents, they were literally like stormtroopers and, Wookiees walking around and stuff like that. And it wasn't really games focused. It had retro games that you could buy, but there were no game tables with games being, exhibited. So we were the only one, and because we weren't selling anything, they gave us the table for free. They were like, yeah, sure, show up. It counts as nerd stuff, so come along. And so we were like, this isn't our audience, but we're going to go anyway, and we'll just see what happens. And, we might find some bugs. Some people might play it. And actually, there were people playing it all day, and kids from like young kids who could barely, use the mouse and needed a parent to help them. And then sort of like young lads who were like maybe 13 or 14, played it and then went away and brought their friends back and were like, they were really engaged with it, and they were like, have you got the bit with the music? And they were really, because dementia sadly isn't niche at all. It's commonplace, and young people know old people because they have parents and grandparents and uncles and neighbors they might like, or so this idea that I think we underestimate gamers and how they engage with certain stories all the time, and think oh, they won't be able to relate to that because it's a woman or it's a black person or it's she's not 25 with big tits or whatever it might be, sort of to be really crude about it, but it is the level of thinking though.
And it's weird how that still happens, because like I say, games are stories, and dementia is something that affects people. It affects real people. So you can make a game about a story that affects people, and it doesn't, to a certain extent, it doesn't matter who the protagonist is, or it doesn't matter that doesn't fit a particular mold. It can still relate to people. So it's just funny that there's still a lot of that thought that it must be in this category to attract this type of person. I feel we should have got past that by now, but apparently not.
Yeah.
Just thinking about the development process a bit more. So we'll start with Claire's. Like, I mentioned it in the intro, but can you just like clarify your role within this 2-person team? Like, what is your role in development and or marketing of the game? And then we'll go to Chella as well.
So I am the programmer. I also was the lead artist. I did the 3D art. So we did have a few other people who we contracted for things like the 2D art and some of the music. So my role was programmer and artist, and then Chella and I worked on the design together. Sort of game design, mechanics, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. And Chella, I guess, story. We sort of covered that aspect. Were there other sort of parts of the process that you had to get involved with that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, so writing the dialogue, and then the narrative design, which is how the story and gameplay intersect and ensuring that they support each other, basically. So, like the game design and the narrative need to sort of mesh and support each other's goals, basically. So and then because I had sort of PR and marketing expertise from my days in boring industries writing copy for them, I sort of focused on our social media and our sort of PR side of things until we could afford proper PR support.
Okay. And then in terms of the post-release, and well, to be fair, I guess marketing starts sort of previous to that. But what were the challenges there in terms of now you've made a game, we now need to get it out to people, because that's often, and I put myself in this category as regards to comics, but that's often the part that people forget. You can make it, that doesn't mean people are going to come to it. So how did you face that?
I mean, I'm definitely grateful that you, like, it wasn't, if it was just, I mean, obviously if it was just me, like, the game wouldn't have happened at all, but, like, I have, like, no marketing PR experience, so I think I probably would have done that. I would have just been like, okay, make the game first, and then, like, try and get people to hear about it first. So, like, Chella was amazing at just knowing kind of what needed to be done with that. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. That's cool.
I suppose it's, people leave the marketing or the PR sort of activity till too late, really. And, we were still later than we could have been just because we didn't have time as a two-person team. And I knew that, we should be updating our blog and engaging with people because we collected names. People signed up to our newsletter that I think we had 1 or 2 issues, maybe 3 issues of it, but people signed up to that to get news of the game for all those 4 years, and then bought the game and were really excited, and which is incredible that people sort of like stuck with us all that time, but we didn't have enough time and energy. I don't know how some teams do it, because they do it, really engage with those people, and it's really difficult when you're doing this as your second job, it wasn't until we got Humble funding that we could then say, maybe we should put some of this into PR and have a good push, because now we are going to be on a proper platform, in a store, and we can support that, give it as much as we can, basically.
Okay. And then you mentioned the funding aspect. So at what point from where you plucked the game idea out of your notebook and started making it to sort of now did that consideration of, okay, we need sort of funding, investment, a publisher, was that part of the process? Like, at what point did that occur?
I think as soon as we realised that we needed additional skills, or like between us we didn't have the time or the capability to do certain things within the game, we realized at that point we can work on it as much as we want, weekends and evenings and stuff, but if we're going to bring other people on, then we need to have some money to do that. So I think it was, I guess, I don't know when that was during development, so halfway through maybe. Well, it was quite a long time of just us working on it and iterating on things before we got to that point. I guess partly because we didn't necessarily know, we didn't start off with a plan of we're going to make a company, make a game that's going to sell games, and then we're going to make another game and all this stuff. It was just we met and we started making something. We were like, oh, let's carry on and see what happens. So it was very much working it out as we went along. And when we got to the point where we needed to bring other people on, we thought, at that point, we're like, well, we should probably start looking into funding possibilities, which took a while, and we did like a lot of applications to various sort of grant schemes, and like pitched the game to publishers and that sort of thing for a while without much luck, which it's a lot of time and energy to do that. And we sort of ended up giving up on that a little bit after a while, and we just thought, oh, we'll just sort of see where we can get with the resources that we do have. So it was amazing when Humble eventually did get in touch and talk to us about being a Humble original, which allowed us to do things like have voice acting in the game, and like Chella said, have money for marketing, which we just wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. I mean, in doing these interviews, like speaking to more indie developers, and I didn't have awareness of the process and the idea. So what you just said, I've heard a version of you take development up until a point, and then you need sort of publisher support, and that has a real impact on the game. So do you have any? I mean, I know you said there was a point where you sort of gave up on pitching to publishers, but is there anything that you learned from that process that someone who is, might also want to go down a similar route of making their own game can learn from in terms of getting that publisher?
I think, something we're doing with our next project is just having our pitch, like knowing what game we're making. We knew what Before I Forget was, but we kind of hadn't cemented it on paper. Our design document came fairly late, and having your elevator pitch and having like a presentation that you can give to publishers that outlines the elevator pitch, who the team is, what the gameplay is, the themes of the game, who the audience might be, maybe games that are similar, looking at sales of games that are similar to the one that you're pitching, and using that to try and forecast, what your price point and how much you might make, which is kind of like reading runes at this stage in the indie games landscape, but you do your best. But yeah, just knowing what your game is, I think, is really important. Claire, you probably have some things too.
Yeah, I guess the other thing would be like if there's some kind of like games community that you are part of or that you know of in your area, or an online one, for example, like I guess some kind of like, I don't know, like a games community for your area, or like Pock and Play or something like that, there'll be like people there who you'd be able to sort of show the pitch deck to, or like just talk through about your game and get feedback on. I think getting in touch with a community of game makers who are like working on similar scale things to you can be really helpful in terms of having a support network and finding out, I guess, just getting like stories from other people about their experiences of pitching and funding. And because I think something that I've definitely found throughout the last few years is that there's like a lot of, there's some really like good supportive networks out there for independent games, and people that are very willing to share the journeys that they've been on and the like pitfalls that they've come across.
I think I've found, I'm not even making games, but getting to talk to people and learning about the process. So there's definitely kind of connections to be made. And I think you didn't say it explicitly, but the networking aspect of going to the game jam, because that's kind of what started all this, right? And Chella, you weren't even going to go, but you went, and look where you are now. So
I know, imagine, wow.
Yeah. So I want to ask like a role specific question of each of you. So can you tell me something that you've learned about your role that you'll carry forward into your next or future projects? So we'll start with Claire. And for Claire, I actually want to narrow it down to programming because I'm quite interested in that. Just being a former software engineer myself, just what you might have learned from that process, particularly being self-taught as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess. I mean, there's like lots and lots of like very specific programming-y things that I look back at the code of before I forget now, and it's just I would write it in a very different way, I think, just because I've learned different things, but just like having one reference to like a script somewhere, and then like rather than like 10 references to the same script, for example. Yeah. And in terms of like Unity and sort of game development in general with like programming, I guess trying to get like a really broad overview and something that you can kind of play through from start to finish, even if it's like super rough and you just have like a cube that represents some like really nicely decorated thing in the future, but something that you can like walk through and get a sense of the space, and that like applies to other things as well, I suppose, with like mechanics. If you're trying out something new, try and get something rough and that you can test really early, and then you can fine tune it later on, because I think it's very, very easy to get caught up in details and do lots of like polish with code and be like, oh, if I tweak these numbers then it'll be like really nice and I'll just try out this like really tiny thing, because that, you know, if you do that you might show it to someone and they have no idea what it is or how to use it or just not like it, and then you'll have to like, you might even not use that particular feature in the final game anyway. So it's much better to try and have like just like a rougher version of it.
Yeah, like a prototype kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do know, I remember like with code, sometimes you just put something together, it's rough, and then it works, and you stick with it, and then it goes in and everything. And that's not good either. So I don't know what the balance is, but I get that.
Yeah, and then it's hard to like rewrite it later. But I would definitely. It was very like spaghetti code when I was doing it initially. I think also because I was working like just a few hours here and there, and then I was trying to get it done like quickly, so I would like have a really like hacky approach to a lot of things, which isn't necessarily bad, but I think I would probably sit down and write out like on paper the structure of the code a bit more as well in future to try and organize it.
I get that. And how about yourself, Chella? Is there anything in terms of writing, narrative design that you learned from this process that you'll carry on or have carried on?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's difficult to play it because there's things I would rewrite, obviously.
That's why I don't read any of the comics that we make once it's printed, because otherwise it's
just like, oh my gosh, why didn't I polish that more? But people still get the gist, I suppose, and that's enough. What have I learned? I think I learned things from working with Claire, obviously, because we think in completely different ways. And so I think I learned how to work with a programmer and an artist, and just sort of like appreciate the things that I do or write that have an impact on, Claire's workload, So, I wrote something about curtains blowing in the wind, like blowing on a breeze. And obviously to program the physics, which is like something I completely overlooked.
Wow. And water over hair in the breeze.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a couple lines, right?
Just like, a crowd runs over the brow of the hill, just program a hard track. Things like that. And one of the things I've taken away is we created a spreadsheet to map the player mood and the Sunita's mood, so her headspace, which is something, so where the player is at in relationship in relation to the character they're playing is really good, because sometimes those can be at odds to create dramatic tension. And it's really good to be able to map those to make sure that you are intentional with, every sort of scene and mood. And so that's something I sort of carry forward.
Okay. Huh. So, yeah, it's made me think now. It's like, yeah, okay, I get that. Cool.
Yeah, so especially with Sunita, because she's an unreliable narrator, and sometimes we know more than she does because she's forgotten something. So sometimes she's having a happy memory, for instance, but we're sad about it because we realise, that Dylan isn't there, or we realise it's something that she's already lost, or something, but she's forgotten that. So Sunita's mood and the player's mood are in different places sometimes.
Okay, that's you don't always appreciate that as a player, that design element that goes into the character, and you as the player, how do we want you to feel as you're playing? Yeah. That's fascinating. I mean, there's tons I can sort of dig into this game, but I will leave it there. One final question of where can we find about yourselves, your game, the work you're doing? Let us know where do we go?
Yeah, I guess Twitter is sort of where we're most active with the game, which is at Freefold Games, with the number 3. And I'm also on Twitter at Shimmerwitch, where, I mean, at the moment I'm mainly doing kind of like freelance work, so my timeline is fairly quiet, but if I'm doing new things, I'll post about it there as well.
Cool. And Chella?
I'm at Chella Ramanan on Twitter. We are at Pock and Play, if people are interested in that. I'm on Instagram as at Chella Writes, but most of that is about clothes, ballet, and pretty sunsets and things. I don't really do stuff about games. Animal Crossing, sometimes I'll post stuff from my island on there. If I don't know who your audience is, but if they're interested and they want to ask questions, my DMs are open basically for people who are interested in getting into games or writing for games.
Cool. All right. No, thank you. And thanks for spending time with us, letting us know about your journeys. Like I said, we put those threads together, and we got your origin story, or like a brief summary of your origin story.
Like superheroes.
Yeah, exactly.
Superhero games, love it.
And if I was better at editing, I would put like special effects right there when you said that. Yeah. I'm not going to, but
bubbles.
Use your imagination, people.
Yeah, we'll imagine it.
Cool. But no, thank you both for joining me. Thank you everyone for watching. Like I said, this is a series that we do speaking to people in the industry, and oftentimes we'll put those details, your contact details, in the description so people can sort of find you if they want to know more. I'm sure there is a lot more to be said about game development, but thank you. Last thing to mention. Actually, a couple of things. Make sure you follow us on YouTube, got to do that whole thing, and Twitch, so you can catch some of our interviews and events live. We also do our podcast, Story X Story, where I co-host with Tazzy, and we talk about stories across pop culture. That includes anime, films, TV, sci-fi, all sorts of genres, and video games, obviously, because video games have stories, which I hope we proved today, if not before. But thanks for joining us. I've been Nigel, and we will see you again soon. Hey there, I'm Nigel from mayamada. Thanks for watching our video. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other great videos we have on the channel. You can also join the GamePad Discord and check out the next event at gamepad.events. We'll see you soon.